Hello, my name is Prada Lujan Patana and welcome to my project titled The Nest, and this is my design portfolio. So for my project statement, I wanted to focus on having the non-humans as protagonists of the site and architecture as facilitated habitats due to my brief being titled Decolonizing Climate and Socially Responsive Design. So I wanted to focus on having a design that's very welcoming and promotes biodiversity to the site of the urban area of Shadwell and connecting areas such as Wapping Woods and River Thames together. So for my site analysis, I wanted to focus on the chosen site of Shadwell Basin and the intersection between the River Thames and the Wapping Woods, and also focusing mainly on the ecological aspects such as the birds, the trees and the fishes, and the way that it kind of intersects between the urban fabric and the moments of human intervention. So I wanted to make a floating bird pavilion, and through the process I used woodworking joinery such as using chipboards and recycled materials. Moving on to more iterative design process, so I wanted to look as three main spaces of fishery, aviary and trees, and creating this bird like pavilion. However, from the feedback itself, I wanted to focus more on the function rather than the form itself, mimicking the bird nest. And second design, where I really looked at the program study, creating spaces for gathering, spaces for bird sanctuary spaces where they can breed, inhabit, observation spaces, bird tower spaces, and I created these forms where I also wanted to focus on having low access for humans, because that's the main goal of my proposal, creating spaces for the non-humans rather than the humans itself. And that's seen more in this design, where there's more interlocking walkways and the main mass over the basin circulating the walkways itself, which is, I felt that could be more improved because there was too much human traffic on the basin. So in this third iteration, I started off by making a 1 to 500 site model, as you can see, and kind of testing out with masses along the whole site of Shadwell rather than just the basin. So I wanted to create more access to the woods, the park and the river itself too. So creating all these moments of intersection, looking at the existing ecology and typology there. And so this is also some of my research and precedent studies. So I looked at 4 main case studies looking at materiality, reeds, and the way of indigenous ways of buildings. So moving on to my design proposal. So my design is titled The Nest, Nature, Sanctuary and School, and it consists of 3 main buildings. And the idea with this perspective is that I wanted to feel almost like if you're a bird soaring through the sky and you're viewing this from a very high ground and you're able to look at these small moments. So looking into the spaces more, there's a forest classroom, this floating classroom and a tight classroom. And in this section, I wanted to kind of see the narrative where it all connects together into the site of Wapping Woods, Shadwell Basin and River Thames, and the existing ecology that's there. So this is for the program and massing. So as you can see, green represents the forest classroom, a brown represents floating classroom, and blue represents a tight classroom. And this is the color that I'll be using throughout the portfolio to identify each spaces itself, as each space has its own set of ecology, species, and also kind of like way of working with the program of the nature and the human itself too. So firstly, looking at the forest classroom, so in this perspective render, I also have the grey wagtail as the main center front. So I kind of focus on this specific type of ecology, whereas the songbirds with the trees and also the insects kind of intersecting together in my design. And there's the walkways that's connecting. So looking at this page, I wanted to focus on the isonometric of the design, which you can see clearly. There's a walkway that leads up to the first floor, and in each design itself, there's a bird box that exists on the first floor where the birds and songbirds can come together, and there's an insect house that's located on the bottom floor where there's all these insects that can come and exist with the enriching ecology, so creating spaces for the non-humans and humans to interact together. And these elements such as the bird box and insect house could actually be made by the community together in this program of my design, which is what I intended it to be. And moving on to the nature corridors, so I call this the nature corridors is because when you view them as buildings, almost viewing them as rooms and the corridors being spaces. So if you view my design as almost one big building, and these are the intersecting pathways that connect the spaces together, but it exists on the outdoor realm. So the main kind of design focus of this nature corridors is that there's the bird nesting area just underneath, and there's a natural ground path. So the building of this will use wooden piles and wooden screw piles, and the idea is that by having this, you don't really need the use of concrete, for any use of like harsh like chemicals of the material itself. And moving on to the main space of the floating classroom. So the floating classrooms kind of provides the main area where it happens, where a lot of the gathering, a lot of the habitats, a lot of the breeding spaces happens, and it's open to the public. So in the main space of the render, I wanted to focus on the mallard, which is the main kind of my inspiration for the design, the floating elements and the buoyancy aspects. Looking at the moments of intersection, which is the nesting area above, the waterfowl breeding area, and the floating wetlands. So the building kind of comprises of these main masses, and the idea is that one would enter and kind of flow into the space and this areas where it's exclusively just for the non-humans, where they can breed, where they can rest and habitat, and the spaces just for the humans itself. Yeah, so there are kind of 10 main spaces, as you can see in this plan, and the circulation in the spaces you can use through walking in the space, but there's also kayaking docks where one is allowed to kayak around the building, creating for more natural, serene-like experiences as to connecting to the Shadwell community area there. And also looking at these renders, I wanted to focus on the main space of the indoor classroom, which is the only thermally insulated space throughout my whole design. So the space kind of provides an area of rest and respite where people can come together, create all these elements, and learn about the birds itself in a very enclosed area. In the following section, you can see more about how the area is laid out. So, and the cladding is created by the reeds that are grown in the site, but the insulation is going to be using wood, stucco, fiber, and also this waffle slabbing technique that's created in this circular space, as you can see in this section, and furthermore in my fragment study. So it's the thermal envelope that's created within the design itself, and by doing so, it kind of creates almost like you're sheltering away from the nature, so it doesn't feel like this huge glass box has been placed in on the basin. So it still creates for a more natural experience, while there's a ramp that intertwines around the spaces itself, rather than having it just sit there. So moving on to the last space, which is the tide classroom, which also features an enclosed space and a semi-enclosed space. So the idea of this I wanted to focus is the grey heron, which is the more natural aspect of the space. So this is focusing on a more lab like area where there's a space where people can come and study specimens on this corner, and also a space where people can come and sit and relax. So it's built on stilts where the nature, the fishes, waterfowls, and the floating aquatic wetlands can also kind of interact with the space in the program that changes from low tide to high tide. So on low tide areas, people can kind of explore in the beach, look at the samples, and on high tide, the ecology also takes over the space and is built around 4 meters. So that's where the tide kind of comes up and changes from 1 meter to 2 meters. So this is showing the program of the spaces. So it's showing the program of not only the humans that kind of interact with the spaces throughout, but also the birds, where they rest, how much time they spend in each area. So how does this kind of coincide with the program of the humans, and how it creates, like, for example, I put myself there. For example, I'm doing a bird study day looking at specific habitats of the first classroom, the floating classroom, and the tide classroom, and how it changes according to the patterns of the birds. Same go for Iba, who is studying about the tides and how her program changes according to the tides, and same go for Time, where he's collecting certain materials and they're still making these, so how it changes, and each of the color coordinate with each of the spaces too. So looking at the health and life safety, so in this I wanted to focus on firstly the circulation of how certain areas are restricted to humans on certain days, certain times, and this creates the idea of like the flowing natural circulation, and also by incorporating a lot of fire resistant coatings and treatments on the timber itself to prevent it from happening, and the use of natural materials leads to the idea of well-being, where there's a lot of ventilation and natural light, and obviously the connection to nature being one of the main things. And looking at the technical integration of material strategy, because I wanted to build a building that isn't meant to last forever, it's meant to be maintained and cared for over time, so it creates a sense of social responsibility in the design and allow the users to care for the spaces more. And same goes for the environmental impact of the area. So of course my main focus is looking at the natural materials and the natural environment and the biodiversity conservation, so this creates a lot of things that's good for the climate and good for the urban area. And this is a summary of my design development, looking at the main spaces from design number 1 to the bird-like pavilion to the main mast and basin, the main masses across Shadwell, and the final design. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you!